Well, for our second panel, we're going to add on some new perspectives. We're asking the same question: what do journalism schools need to know about drones? But now we're going to hear some different answers. Answers from government, from industry, and drone manufacturers. These are the perspectives that we don't normally seek out when it comes to journalism education. By now you know what we're trying to do here, right? We are trying to start new conversations and start new initiatives. We're trying to open up new lines of communication. So with that, let's start talking. I'm pleased to introduce our panelist. Sylvain Bourque is with Transport Canada. He's a key member of Transport Canada's remotely piloted aircraft systems task force, and has been closely involved with the development of Canada's new drone regulations, which come into effect on June 1st. So that brings a unique perspective because he also worked with CBC for many years, and most recently was CBC's chief drone pilot. And I'm going to guess you guys are going to have a few questions. Next to him is Ruby Syed. Ruby is with IATA, the Aviation Industry's International Trade Association for the world's airlines. Understand that as we in Toronto on May 2nd discuss what journalism schools need to know about drones, understand that this is only one small piece of the picture, that discussions are going on at a global level as governments and industry and operators and manufacturers try to figure out how to send hundreds of thousands more drones into the air each year, and to do that safely. As the head of IATA's air traffic management advocacy, Ruby brings that perspective to our discussions today. She's a key player in the aviation industry's global campaign to integrate drones into the existing air traffic management infrastructure. And finally, next to Ruby, I'd like to introduce you to David Hansell. David is the public policy manager for DJI. As most of you will know in this room, DJI is the world leader in drone manufacturing, and David certainly brings us that perspective. But before that, he also worked as an air traffic controller. He was the head of aviation in the Obama White House, and the head of aviation policy for Facebook. So I think you'll all agree we've got a pretty interesting mix of panelists here. So let's get started. Each panelist will make some remarks. Then we're going to talk amongst each other, the panelists, and then we will open it up to the floor for your question. Sylvain, why don't you start us off?
Good morning, everyone. So I'll start by giving basic information about the new regulation. So I have a presentation for you. Okay, so we're Transport Canada has a mandated role from the Canadian government. So we're responsible for developing and we're seeking transportation policy and programs. So Canadians have access to a transportation system that is safe, secure, and very important, innovative. So drone is a big innovation for aviation. We are a member of JARIS. What is JARIS? It's the Joint Authorities for Rulemaking of Unmanned Systems. So JARIS is a group of experts gathering technical, safety, and operational expertise from 59 countries of all around the world. So Canada, United States, China. So the biggest country are part of JARIS. So the context, the new rules for drone were announced January 1st, 2019. It is the part 9 of the Canadian aviation regulation. It follows consultation period with industry, drone industry and Canadians. And so it took 4 years to issue that new regulation. The new rule will come in force June 1st, within a month. Now, or previously, until June 1st, drone pilots must fly under the current rules. For recreational pilots, there is an interim order number 9, respecting the use of model aircraft. For commercial operation, which is journalism use of drone, the pilot need a SFOC, Special Flight Operation Certificate. Also, there's existing exemption for commercial use, but it's kind of a SFOC. So in the coming rules, there's 2 types of operation. Basic operation, mainly outside control airspace, so in give you permission to fly in uncontrolled airspace, to fly more than 100 feet or 30 meters of people. There's also the advanced operation type of operation. So it's you need to have that certificate to fly inside a controlled airspace, and also if you want to fly closer to people. Closer means between 100 feet and 16 feet, or over people. That being said, to be able to fly in the advanced operation, you need to have the right drone. So a drone must meet certain requirements to conduct advanced operation. Manufacturer must make a declaration that a drone is intended for use in advanced operation. There's a list on our website. You're supposed to have a card that is giving the information to go on our drone safety website. And there you will see a list of the advanced operation drones that are possible to fly inside control airspace, near people, or over people. So there's a possibility to fly over people in Canada if you have the advanced operation certificate, and also if you have the right drone to do it. For now, there's few drones that give you that possibility. You need to register your drone, mark your drone that the marking are visible. You need also to obtain a certificate, a RPAS pilot certificate related to the type of operation you're planning. Also, you have to keep in mind that other rules may apply. Most of the journalists are aware of the regulation. So the same regulation that applies to ground cameras applies to drone cameras. Okay. So also there's the regulation for Parks Canada and also other regulations. So how are the rules enforced? There's TC inspectors, but also some RCMP officers have the ability to issue fines to drone operators. Also, we are partnering with other law enforcement agencies, with the municipality, like OPP or other enforcement agency. There's also provision in the criminal code that if you're using a drone impaired under the influence of drugs or alcohol, it's a criminal offense. Or if you're endangering the safety of an aircraft. So I presume the last thing journalists want is to have their company name in the news because they use their drone improperly. So most complaints we receive are filed after the fact. So at the time of publication. So we got some question about what happened what about the foreign operator, or if the journalist goes to another country to fly airpass. So Canada is asking, starting June 1st, we're asking a foreign operator to apply for SFOC. We are looking for the same level of competency as we ask for Canadian pilots. We ask for proof that they are authorized to use airpass in their own country. They need to have Canadian airpass regulation knowledge, referred on the official documentation. Airpass need to be marked and registered in their own country. Note that the Canadian airpass pilot should expect the same in other countries. There is no actually there is no FAA credit or in other country for a Canadian airpass pilot. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Ruby, are you just going to stay in your seat, or do you want to come up here?
I can stay in my seat if
Go.
that's okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here with you. I think this is a great forum to have these discussions, and personally, I think that the profession of journalism is very important in our day, in our life, and being part of the discussion today is just very overwhelming and rewarding for me. Thank you, Linda, for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. As Linda mentioned, I work for the International Air Transport Association, and we represent airlines, commercial aviation, worldwide. And our mission, similar to Selva, is to make sure that we have safe, efficient, sustainable, and affordable air transport. What we are seeing with the new emerging technologies, and there was a mention before about disrupting technologies, is that the definition of air transport, especially the transportation of goods and people, is changing and evolving. Unmanned technology is getting into this area, and we are seeing more and more use of unmanned aircraft systems, which is UAS, or what we are commonly referring to here today as drones, in the different categories, sizes, and purposes of operations. The drones and UAS are transforming how we are going to transport goods and people in the future. At the same time, we are seeing an exponential increase of use of drones for commercial and corporate purposes, whether it's agriculture, journalism, photography, surveillance and inspection, and air transport or commercial aviation is making use of that. We are using drones for inspection. We are using drones for aircraft inspection, and that is in a very close proximity to an aircraft. We are seeing more and more drones used in airport. Our airlines, our member airlines, are looking into unmanned aircraft systems coming into urban air mobility as an extension of the services they provide. Last mile delivery with the drones. So all this to say that we have a vested interest in making sure that this industry, that the use of drones is safe, is secure, but also that we tap into the opportunities that they provide. And they provide a lot of opportunities in terms of business models, but also innovative technologies for infrastructure, for managing the drones in the airspace, and how will that look in the future. But what does that all mean for a curriculum related to journalism using drones? And what does that mean for students who want to use drones in the future? For any business model, it needs to be safe, to be sustainable. If we continue to have irresponsible use of drones, it will negatively affect corporate and commercial use of drones. So we need to make sure that we continue with a responsible use of drones regardless of the purpose of using that drone. So that we make sure that we continue to be sustainable, that the drone technology continues to be something that we can tap into and expand and grow and use for the multiple purposes. Because there is value in creativity, in innovation, in storytelling for journalism. So that is one aspect that is very important. Another aspect is the education and safety awareness. And this is an area that we feel, as the aviation industry, we can partner with academic institutes, with research institutes. We have over 70 years of flying experience. That includes a wealth of knowledge about airmanship, what we call airmanship, or how to be involved in air transport and air operations. We also have a lot of safety data. So how can we partner in education? And this is something that we are trying to do with our headquarters office that is based in Montreal. It's getting more involved with academic institutes in Canada particularly, because we see also Canada as an innovation hub for a lot of emerging new technologies. So we would very much be interested in getting more involved with academic institutes, maybe developing joint training courses together. There was a mention before about the code of ethics, and how can we get the safety standards embedded in those codes of ethics, or let's say best practices and standard operating procedures when you use a drone for purpose X or Y or Z. And this is something that we feel very strongly about because we're taking a very inclusive view and we see this as the future. And what I would like to get from at the end of the day and at the end of this initiative, Linda, is how we can really collaborate and build some partnerships. Not just talk about collaboration and partnership, but really act with partnership in mind and with trust, and bring those bridges together and the experiences together. Because we also have a lot to learn from the new industries, the new entrants, the creative way of using drones. Definitely we can collect a lot of data and lessons learned from these experiences. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, I'll come up there. Yeah. Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is David Hansell. I'm with DJI. Ideally, if we're doing our job well, no one has to Google DJI to figure out who we are and what we do. The folks who've already spoken this morning, whether it's on the regulatory side or whether it's on the application side out in the aviation industry today, DJI products are implicated in all of those conversations, whether it is the aircraft we are building or the policy work we are doing in helping civil aviation authorities develop regulations which are reflective of the realities of the technology of today and of what is coming down the road. We are in that entire ecosystem. We're part of this now, and this is a very exciting time to be doing this. We were invited to come up here, and our head of press for our policy team in the United States said, whatever else you are doing, you will go talk to people in the industry of journalism. Not just because journalism is using drones in really innovative and leading edge ways, particularly from a regulatory perspective in terms of operations near and over people and in urban environments. But drones are the stories of today. And more we are seeing reporting about drones. And as someone in the drone industry and for others here who've worked in aviation, when you hear someone say something, you're like, man, that's just not right. That's not physically possible, and that's the wrong terminology. It does a disservice to the greater community that we're all supposed to be serving. And so it's important to start getting these sets of knowledge down early and get them right and ingrained into how we talk about the society that's evolving. There is not an industry out there today that's on the leading edge of technology that is not contemplating or actually using drones in some sort of creative fashion, whether it's mapping natural disasters, infrastructure inspection, journalism. Just last week there were drones delivering kidneys to a person who's getting a kidney transplant. Only 3 miles, and you think, oh, okay, why didn't you just drive 3 miles? That's great if you're in Toronto, unless the traffic is what it was on the way from the airport this morning. But if you're in a part of the world like Rwanda, where people are dying on a regular basis because they can't get blood after they give birth, companies like Zipline are solving that using drones. They're saving lives every day using drones. And so this is the world that we exist in, and it's only going to accelerate more quickly. Canada is also particularly exciting because the regulations that Sylvain was speaking about are probably some of the most advanced in the world in terms of how a government agency contemplates their obligation to protect people on the ground and people in the skies. They take a very measured approach, but they're very cooperative and they're very forward-leaning, and I expect they'll be very adaptable for years to come. So it's important for us to be in these conversations. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and any questions you have. I brought a Mavic with me if anyone wants to put their hands on it and play with it. Can't let you fly it, unfortunately. I don't have my Canadian license, sorry. So. Thank you.
Inside?
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, inside.
Inside.
Just like the FAA, I love it. Great, thank you very much.
Why don't we just pick up where you left off, because you mentioned that drone technology is only going to accelerate over the next few years. Where is drone technology going in the next 5 or 10 years? What do journalism schools need to know about that?
One of the statistics I really love about what's happened, particularly in the US since the inception of Part 107, the Department of Transportation put out
Sorry,
all
what is
these...
Part 107? Just for...
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. So Part 107 is probably the most comparable comparison to the basic and advanced operations work that's here. It divides drone operations into recreational and commercial purposes. And they scale kind of similarly to the way the testing is required for a basic certificate versus an advanced certificate, which entitles you to do more advanced things. So Part 107 came into effect in August of 2016, and for about a year before that, DOT, the Department of Transportation, was forecasting all these numbers about how many drones there would be in the sky, how many licensed operators there would be, the types of operations they would be doing, and every single one of them was wrong by miles. They underestimated everything. The arc of the power curve in the drone space is exponentially faster and exponentially higher than anyone has anticipated. So what I like to tell people is, whatever you can envision, multiply that by probably 10. If there's a use case you can think of, someone's probably already doing it, and they're probably doing it in a much crazier fashion than you would envision. Like, oh my God, people are dropping, parachuted coffee down to people in Virginia, and they're, delivering blood around Africa and kidneys in North Carolina. No one was talking about that in any seriousness years ago. So whatever you're anticipating, just be excited that you're going to be wrong.
So what do you think then the mindset of journalism schools should be as they try to plan their curricula going forward for the next 5 or 10 years? Yeah,
Flying is flying. I think in a lot of ways it's foundational. The tools get better. Our technology and all other drone manufacturers' technology gets better so that your flying becomes safer and safer. But it's also a perishable skill. It's something that you have to practice to be good at. It's something you have to understand the aerodynamics of, and very, very importantly, you have to understand the rules. So while the technology and the use cases are going to continue to evolve, the rules, they move slower. That's just the regulatory world in which we live. But it is equally important to keep an eye on, and on the previous panel someone mentioned, to make sure that you are flying legally in the use case that you are using, or that you're exploiting, however you want to refer to that. Those have to be foundational. So understanding the technology and understanding the regulatory environment in which you work have to be a constant, ongoing process, because the rules are going to change eventually, and you have to keep an eye on those and operate within the legal framework.
So then, do you want to jump in on that, on the technology being ahead of the rules? How do we, at the journalism schools, I said the technology is ahead of the rules. How do we keep up with that?
So that's why when we have in mind, when we were working on the regulation, our perspective needed to be in advance. So not knowing what technology will be in advance, we need to make it open to evolution or to innovation. So that's why I think that for training purposes, we need to train on a philosophy, not train yet for sure people that are going to be pilot needing to do the regulation, but the basic of the training needs to be on a philosophy behind using drone, and I don't think this will change too much, because safety needs to be number one, safety of people, safety of the operation, and safety of the user of the airspace.
Ruby,
I'm pretty sure you go ahead. Yeah, I was going to ask you a specific question, but I bet you go ahead.
I just want to jump in on this conversation. So, Airbus recently released some statistics looking into the future, and they did some projections. By 2035, which for some people might be very far away, but it's really not if you look at the cycle of technology and regulatory framework and all of these things. Over the skies of Paris, but each hour we will have about 150 commercial airlines operating, about over 2,000 urban air mobility vehicles, over 16,000 drones delivering cargo, and add to that hobbyists, add to that infrastructure inspection, add to that journalists using drones and surveillance and all of these other uses. So to your question, Linda, if we look at the future, this is going to be much bigger than we even can think of today. And the regulatory framework is, in Canada, it's more advanced than in other countries, in other states. When you look at the rest of the world, there aren't a lot of regulations even in some places where there are use cases and trials like they are in Canada. If you look at the international community for developing regulations under ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, which also happens to be in Montreal as well, because Canada is also an aviation hub. The cycle for developing a standard takes 5 years. The drone industry will not wait 5 years. So there is a recognition that things need to change. And even ICAO, when they look at their way of making rules and standards right now, they are reaching out to the industry. They are reaching out to the drone industry, to drone manufacturers, to drone operators, to get all this data, because they want to have the use cases and the data drive the regulations. And I think in the future we will see more and more trials and use cases that will help us learn of what is the risk, what is the level of the risk. Because at the end of the day, and I think it was mentioned on the previous panel, we need to make sure that the risk is something that we are operating within an environment of a calculated risk. Can we accept the risk, or is the risk beyond our acceptable level? And when you're talking about safety of life, there's really very strict rules there, and we cannot compromise them. But how do we work together to make sure that we maintain our level of safety?
Well, that's a good question actually for the Industry Association, IATA, because if you have technology that's 5 to 10 years ahead of the regulations, how can we in journalism schools collaborate with you in industry to produce something that bridges that gap, that talks about industry standards and practices, and bridges the gap between the technology out here and the regulations back here? What are some ideas that you have for collaborating?
Well, we've recently initiated an informal think tank where we are engaging the drone industry, and what we would like to do is get some of the data from them, not just about the use cases and the operations, but what were the operational challenges? Were there any incidents that we can then assess? Because and Sylvain might have more, might add to that more, because when you do a risk assessment, you need the data to do that kind of risk assessment. And this is where we want more data from the industry. And I think working with academic institutes where you have also the possibility of doing simulations, doing research for us to work together on some concepts, I think that is very valuable. We are starting to do that. Of course, we are starting to partner with some academic institutes in Montreal, but I think since we are in Canada, there's really a very rich pool of knowledge here that we can tap into.
Absolutely. So then, did you want to jump in on that?
No, nothing.
Okay. I have another question for Ruby then. Ruby, you were talking about test cases and trials. In journalism schools, we're always very interested in giving real-life reporting experiences to our students. What's there? Could this be something we could be reporting on, our students could report on?
Absolutely. I think that there are a lot of avenues that the students can explore. So there's one particular initiative that comes to mind in addition to what was mentioned about Zipline. There's a platform for innovation called Aerial Futures, and they are just launching the Victoria Lake Challenge. Actually, it was launched last year, and they are inviting innovators, drone enthusiasts, students from the university, from the college here could be candidates, and their main focus is how can technology in transportation enhance the lives of people.
Yes.
So for them in Africa, as was mentioned, it's about saving lives. Drones are used not just to report or to tell a story, but also it's saving lives. So that is something, they have a website, you can all participate, you can log into that competition. It's a competition.
Zipline?
No, it's Aerial Futures.
Aerial Futures.
Aerial Futures and the Victoria Lake Challenge. There are also a lot of challenges that go around the world. IATA is hosting one of these competitions for concepts of operations using drones for transportation. And if there are students who would like to cover some of our events, we welcome that. There's a lot going on, and there are a lot of opportunities for students to get that kind of feel of what it looks like, or how would it look like in an operational context. Of course, we all follow the safety rules. We don't breach on anything, but these are opportunities for students to explore.
Speaking about those safety rules, we had a question earlier from Lori. Just go here. Where are you, Lori? There you are. Thank you. Holding the mic. Thank you. About flying over about the need for our students to get more experiential learning. They use their drones, but actually tell a story with them. And she used flying over a protest at Queen's Park, which is our legislature here in Ontario, as an example. You stood up and you talked about the basic and the advanced. What more do you think that maybe Transport Canada could work with us in journalism schools to help students like Lauren understand that there is something that could be done there?
There's already a lot that has been done about flying over people, as an example. So because we're always looking at the potential risk before issuing a permission or regulation. So for flying over people, there was some study made to look what would be the maximum weight and the technology needed to fly over people without putting these people at risk. And that's why they came up with the regulation that it needs to have kind of a parachute or other technology stuff that if something bad happens to the drone, it's not going to kill someone. And as being a previous drone operator, I can tell you that most of the case, you don't need to fly over people. You can be, let's say, 5 meters on the side and you will still have the perspective of like if you were flying above or over the people. So I think the actual regulation is very, even if you need to buy the proper drone, it gives a lot of permission to the journalists.
Okay. Any other comments by the panelists, or I'll open it up to the floor for questions? Okay. I would like to open it up to the floor for some of your questions.
My question is more directed to you, David. Right now, there's a fear that in the future, human jobs will be replaced by technology. And drones, I would consider them as one of those technologies. From a journalist perspective, in the future, before journalists had to hire a helicopter to get like aerial footage, there's jobs in there, helicopter pilots and everything. The more people use drones now, where you wouldn't need to pay for a helicopter, like you find at DJI, like you're competing with the helicopter companies now for this, which is essentially business.
Yeah, I mean, I take some comfort in the reality that that's not unique to the drone industry. It's new for us, but the Model T put the horse and buggy industry out of work. But those people didn't, the horse and buggy folks didn't wind up walking and like still being unemployed on their horse. They adapted to the new technology and integrated that into part of their operation. So I think responsibly, what we as a society should be aiming to do is ensuring that the products are available to everyone who wants to have access to them, so that they can begin to integrate those into what their current and future operations look like. I've been in the aviation industry I love flying, and it's an amazing thing, but I also take an immense amount of comfort in the fact that you can remove so much risk to people when you move to drone operations away from certain manned operations. Not in all cases. There's a lot of cases to be made. I don't think we're going to see passenger planes without pilots for a really long time. I think eventually we will, but I don't think that's going to happen quickly. And so I think as a society we owe it to each other to ensure that the people who are in those now have a path to come along for that journey.
Another question here?
Yes, hi. My name is Iktisa. I have a question. Number one is, how do you figure or design that is a proper drone? Number one, and number two is that how manufacturing companies complying with that? How do you figure out these things?
So
Thank you.
thank you. So the best way to have the proper information is to go on our website. So it's drone safety. If you go there, you have somewhere you can click and choose the right drone. And when you click on it, you see the list that it's regularly updated. And you can see it as today, there's some DJI products and other products that are fit to fly in controlled space, near people or over people. So that's the way to do it. So every day, because this list is updated constantly, you need to go there often. And also, so the second question is about, so there's a advisory circular. So the engineering, Transport Canada engineering group work on setting up about 80 pages documentation that set up standards for the constructor or manufacturer. And the manufacturer, they need to declare that they are declaring that their drone is sorry, just help me on this, is complying with the one of the three cases or so that's our, so maybe you could add on this.
Yeah, any manufacturer that exists in any regulatory environment has these challenges. We get regulatory instruction from jurisdictions all around the world about what our drones need to be able to do. We try to partner early on in conversations with civil aviation authorities to ensure that we understand exactly what they mean and what meets that standard of measurement. How can we prove that standard of measurement? Because the Canadian model requires that we declare it. We don't actually have to give a bunch of stuff to Transport Canada, but on the back end, at any time, Transport Canada can pick up the phone and demand that we give that to them. So we don't conceal it, and we certainly don't lie about it. We're dedicated to the safety of the flying and non-flying public. So we partner early on in the conversation to make sure that we can meet that standard. And in like for operations in controlled airspace, you have to have a certain amount of plus or minus vertical reliability and left, right, front, back reliability as well. So you measure the accuracy of your barometers, your GPS units, your control systems that feed into that. There are more systems implicated as you move up the ladder of complexity to ops near people and ops over people. But it's an iterative process. If we change equipment, we have to go back to Transport Canada and say, hey, we've put a new widget in there and that's replacing this old one, but the reliability is X. Is that still okay? And Transport Canada says yay or nay, and if they say nay, we figure out a better way to do it.
Question over here?
Yeah. My question is a slightly different question. It's a recreational use of drones. And I belong to a photo club. Number of us are planning to take the basic level certification. And the question is, the new rules are very explicit and very clear. We appreciate that. But at the same time, if I see the rules and see where I can use the drone for recreational purposes, more or less it comes to do it in your home or your personal property, because everywhere else it is prohibited. Any comments on that?
So I understand your question. Your question is, can I use my drone in my home or on my personal property?
No. Recreational user is not allowed to use it in number of places.
Mm-hmm.
So only place they can possibly use is own home. So that's why.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So before there was a differentiation between recreational and commercial users, and now in the new regulation, so that was very difficult to measure for the law enforcement people. So in the new regulation, there is no differentiation between recreational and commercial operators. So that's why there's no differentiation. And basic is easy to get. For sure, there's some recreational pilots that are flying in the cities, in the advanced environment, but also there's other possibility to be part of the miniature aircraft association. So it's not ready yet, but there should be a kind of an exemption for the MAC user to be able to, if they follow MAC rules, to be able to fly their drone outside the actual regulation. And because I've been told that the MAC rules are more restrictive than the Transport Canada rules. So does this answer to your question?
Somewhat.
Well, maybe it's something you can pick up at lunch, a little bit of time, so Dan will be here for lunch. Question over here, Brody.
It's a question for Sylvain. Could you help me understand, with the new rules for the advanced, what emergency operations, is quite a specific restriction on emergency operations and also advertised events. And maybe just, because what I'm trying to figure out is, as a journalist, let's say I have my advance, I'm using a registered drone, everything, and a train derails in Mississauga, and I want to cover that. Am I able to cover that with using a drone?
So it depends how close you're going to be to the operation. Because if there's it's not, let's say there's an emergency situation, and Transport Canada doesn't want to be the other aircraft or airspace user to be endangering the operation from the ground. So there's a way to do it without being over it. So you need to be outside the boundaries. Usually the boundaries of this emergency situation is the boundary where there's a yellow banner or there's a police blocking the roads. So this is usually the limitation of the drone use, I would say.
Well, sorry, just to follow up. Am I able to, this is restricted airspace, would I not need to file a request, like, are you able to respond to spot news, breaking news?
So you need to follow the regulation. So if it's inside air control airspace, yes, you need to ask for permission. If it's outside, let's presume it's outside control airspace, you don't need to have a permission if you respect the boundaries of the emergency situation. So if you're asking, okay, I want to go over it, I want to go into it. So this is another situation. So maybe Sandy can help me on this, because just to introduce Sandy. So Sandy, he is a civil aviation inspector. So I'm working on the standards, but Sandeep is working, I would say, on these type of situation or requests.
Okay, your question directly relates to the emergencies that happen, for example, derailment. We are facing a problem in Quebec and North Ontario or with the flooding. If you want to go and do use your drone there, no, you cannot, because the airspace has been restricted by 5.1 under Aeronautics Act. The Minister restricted airspace, no aviation activities will take place. So your unmanned aircraft, the RPAS or drone as you call it, is also an aircraft. You cannot fly there unless you get permission from the user or the agency which is controlling their airspace. Now what will happen is, in case there is a derailment, for example, let's say somewhere here in GTA, there will be an area which will be blocked off by the law enforcement, just for the safety of the people on the ground who are working there. So you would have to liaise with them and take permission, provided you have the machine, which is allows you to go closer. If they permit you to go on there, because I suppose every journalist will want to cover it, so you cannot have everybody milling around there, and there'll be a problem of managing the airspace. In case the law enforcement or the emergency responders have to cordon off that area, I don't think you will be able to go in there, unless they permit you. And even the municipalities have, you have to restrict yourself to what the municipal laws are existing. The aviation regulations under Part 9 do not override the existing municipal laws. There are certain municipalities which restrict you to fly over their areas. So that is also incumbent, that you cannot, override that. So to answer your question specifically, you'll need specific permission from the agency which is controlling that particular thing, whether it is Toronto Police, VMS, or City of Toronto. That is what it comes on. You need to have the machine, and you have to have the permission.
So thank you,
That
Sandy.
answers the question.
So, and also I suggest to all journalists to take written permission, to get written permission. Why? It's because if there's a law enforcement process, they said yes, he said yes to me. No, you have a proof of it. So after that, you may go to court. So it's better to have written permission. Same with the airspace permission. Okay, and the second question about no advertised event. So this is to protect the areas, that there's, let's say, a Formula One racing for Montreal or other these big events that are high-risk area because there are a lot of people, and also a lot of drone operators, they don't have technical knowledge, and they're not aware about all the possibility of Wi-Fi, because each cell phone has a Wi-Fi transmitter. So if there's 10,000 cell phones, there's a lot of there could be a lost link. There's a high possibility that there could be a lost link with a low-end aircraft. So that's why Transport Canada need to make sure that first there's a permission or from the organizers, and also that you're using the proper technology to fly there. So that's why we set in the high-risk scenarios or the high-risk areas to ask for SFOC. For sure, if you're asked to go to, so in the morning when so that's the news story. In the morning when there's the meeting, they say, okay, go cover that story for today. It's too late because you need to ask 30 days in advance. So that's a shame, but we need to make sure there's no risk, and so an inspector needs to look at it and make sure there's no risk to the people involved in the advertised event. So the limitation of the advertised event, it's where there's fences, boundaries, so the same thing as emergency situation. So if there's police or a place that they are asking you your ticket, so that's the boundary. You can fly with your drone outside of it, and if you have a good drone, you're able to have a tighter lens and be able to do nice shots of the event. Thank you.
Just one comment from voting. Sandeep, you mentioned there could be all kinds of drones. There are all sorts of media organizations, and you're absolutely right. But media organizations also do pooling. When the Queen comes to Canada, we have one camera and follows her around, and then we all share it. And I just wonder, and I'll just put it out there, maybe there's a research initiative that journalism schools can get together with government, with industry, and develop some sort of protocol. So if we're going to pool a feed with drones, if there is a train derailment in Mississauga, and we just put one drone up, how do we manage that? There was a question from over here.
There's been a lady over here.
Oh,
Sorry, can I get really two quick questions? First off, if we're talking a train derailment, wouldn't Transport Canada immediately put up a NOTAM, so a notice to airmen, which would ban all drones anyway, correct? Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
they could, but usually there is a process that it will not be instantly. Like if you look at the flooding, it took maybe 4 days before, but at the beginning it was okay, but the recreational user of drone, every day it was getting more, there was more and more drones, so after 4 days it was not manageable. So that's why they shut down the airspace.
Thank you. And David,
But that could happen also.
David, I'm curious about the 250 gram threshold.
Sure.
We've seen little reconnaissance drones made for soldiers and stuff out in the battlefield. Will DJI be chasing that 250 gram mark to avoid the regulations?
So it's sort of a twofold process. We do build things that are under 250. The great thing about that same tech power curve that I talked about before, batteries keep getting better at lighter weights. The performance components, flight control components, get better at lighter weights. And so we are working to have lighter drones. We're not doing it with the intent of skirting regulations, however, that has a stinky connotation to it. But concurrently on the policy side, I wholeheartedly do not agree with 250 gram regulation. I don't agree with the physics studies that were used to develop that, when those were derived largely when the Small UAS Registration Task Force began in 2015 in the United States. That number came out of old shrapnel incident studies for rocket launches, and it talks about how kinetic energy transfers, but they're talking about like chunks of metal flying at people, and yes, a chunk of metal, like a bullet, that weighs much less than 250, I don't want that to hit me. But the physics of how drones behave in failure states, how they fall, how they break when they impact, how the kinetic energy is transferred. There's been a lot of studies recently that indicate you could probably go twice as high, if not more, than 250 grams, while still maintaining that lower level of kinetic energy transfer. So it's not just about the weight, it's how that energy transfers to your body that is important. And so we're trying to partner with regulators around the world to explore, as people like journalists and other innovators are flying and doing things and learning how their craft behave, we're trying to get those folks to talk to regulators as well to say, hey, you know what, we're not seeing that. And regulators they want to see that. I don't think regulators are being nefarious. They're doing their job in protecting the public with the data they have available. I think it's incumbent on us to give them more data. And so we're not chasing it to skirt it. We're doing it because it's better for the users, it's better for pricing, it's better for performance. And we want to explore pushing higher than 250. But it is what it is today, and we'll work within that. And that's why we've developed aircraft that you can now use in advanced operations for controlled airspace, and we should have near airspace here pretty soon.
So I know you want to jump in on
Yeah,
that.
I want to.
Comment on this.
The microphone is heading your way.
Love it.
250 grams is not the benchmark that you can do whatever you want to do because the Part 9 rules don't apply to you. There is still the underlying safety factor exists that you have to fly that machine, which is 250 grams and less, in a very safe manner and not endanger anybody. So that becomes your responsibility. I agree, there is no need for a certificate, or the rest of the Part 9 regulations do not apply, or you may not be getting a ticket to fly wherever you are flying. But in case you're flying unsafe, there are other rules which apply. So that is to be kept in mind.
Yeah, if you're not going to fly safely, don't fly.
So there's a myth in Canada that people think that, okay, I will buy a lighter drone and I can do whatever I want. So let's say there's a journalist, he buys a 249 grams drone and something bad happens. He crashes drone on people. First thing, so how did you operate? If the actual regulation is asking you there's some safe regulation to make it safe, the use of drone, make the use of drones safe. So, and if you are flying, let's say 2 feet above people, so the actual regulation 900-06 that Sandy was just talking about is open. It's an open regulation. So we can presume that it was not being operated safely, and there could be some fine or some suits.
I didn't mean to suggest.
Yeah, but it's a good question. Huh? So, but
Well,
you
that means that
raised a
millennial
very good question that we are asked often, that yes, there's a way to bypass the rule. No, it's more open, but you still need to operate it safely.
There are still repercussions if you.
Yes.
Okay, we got 2 more questions. I think we have time for at least 2. So there's one in the back there, and then Caroline.
Me?
Yeah, you.
All right. Sort of continuing in that vein, it's not just that drones will get lighter, but they'll get cheaper. And while everyone in this room is, educated in the ethics and, sorry?
Oh, keep going. No, keep going. Sorry, no.
Sorry, not everyone in this room.
I'm
but-
talking to the director who's telling me the next person who's got questions.
We may be familiar with the ethics and morals and the laws, but I think we've learned through disruptive technologies recently that we're also up against the people who didn't learn that. They went out, they bought the cheapest drone they could, they went to the same thing we did, and if I can't fly there because it reflects on my employer, but he or she doesn't care because they can just fly their drone. It's disposably cheap now. Get the shot, put the shot online, and sell the shot to whoever they like. Where are we with enforcement when regulations are great? But I think with Uber and all the disruptive technology we've seen, they're only as good as enforcement. So what does law enforcement look like when it comes to drones? We had, I think, Pearson recently, there was a drone that was hanging out near a runway, if I recall correctly, and it took hours. It was shut down, and I don't know if they ever really found out who or where or how long that took, but it just feels like these rules are all well and good, but is law enforcement and the enforcement of them, is that up to snuff? Are we there? What do you say?
So the main mandate of Transport Canada is to issue regulation, and yes, part of our mandate is to do law enforcement, but we cannot be everywhere. So especially in the airports, there's already a safety personnel. So they are trained to be able to enforce. So like what happened in Gatwick. So for sure in Canada, they say, oh, this could happen to our airport. So every big airport, for sure, they are looking at to have an emergency measure to how to operate on this case. And like I said earlier, there's already some law enforcement agencies, not only RCMP, but other agencies that are working with Transport Canada to be able to do law enforcement. Because as you know, drone has a flight limit of maybe 20 minutes, or let's say 30 minutes. Call the police, say, I'm seeing a drone. Usually they will arrive and say, where's the drone? Yeah, but he's gone. And other problem we see in the advertised events. So the law officer, they are seeing a drone. They say, hey, we see the drone. Where's the operator? They're looking for the operator. They're not able to find it. Often they are 2 kilometers away, and because they know that if they're under it, they will be caught. And so that's why they're smart. They fly from away, so it's very difficult to find.
Just one more comment. My name is Trevor Lyons. I work at the CBC. We do lots of train derailment type stuff. And maybe just a comment for Sylvain and Sandeep to take back to your meetings. Journalistically, it's difficult. It puts us in a difficult situation to ask the person who may have caused the problem permission to shoot their problem. So that's maybe something that journalism students can think about. If I have to go, I don't want to cause a problem to the airspace. I want to be respectful and safe in the airspace. But what if the municipality who has declared the emergency is the department that has caused the problem? They're not going to give me permission to get pictures of that problem. And I think there's a public interest in seeing those pictures.
Okay, another question here?
So my question is more just out of sheer curiosity, but how come the industry itself isn't responsible for regulation? So I mean, like you can purchase a car without a license, but you can't purchase, let's say, a gun without a license. So how was that distinction made when you were going about this?
That's a question for Ruby.
Thank you. I think it's a question for all the panelists.
Yes.
But because it needs to be regulated, because you're flying, because a drone is an aircraft, and you cannot operate an aircraft without having the proper licensing and regulations. And also, the regulator cannot be the operator or the user, because you need to have the oversight. The safety oversight needs to be independent. And this is the airmanship and the safety standards that we have been operating in the aviation industry for a long time. Now, how much of this can we scale? How much of this, where are the exceptions? And there's a lot of discussion of the weight and where do we draw the line and what is the risk assessment. This is all evolving as the technology evolves, but the safety oversight, you cannot have a self-regulated industry, because even the automotive industry, there are some regulations and standards. You cannot drive a car without the license, so you should not be able to operate a drone without the license. And you're not going to issue that license to yourself. You need someone to issue that license to you. And when we're talking about operation in the air and the impact of not only just yourself or the airspace, you're talking about the safety of the people on the ground. There's a huge safety liability issues if something goes wrong. Maybe it won't go wrong, but if it goes wrong, you need to make sure that the system has gone through all the checks and balances that are required for that. And I think from a manufacturer perspective, David has a lot to add, and also the regulator.
Just very quickly, these started, the small drone industry largely started as toys. And particularly in the United States, Congress didn't even acknowledge until that they were aircraft for a very long time. And so we existed in this consumer technology space. And until the government sets a framework in which we have to evolve, and it's still that way in some jurisdictions. Until they set that framework, it's up to us to just try to be as responsible as we can, lacking regulatory guidance. And so the new rules come online in Canada, and we built towards that. But we have to work in the regulatory framework that exists.
We have run out of time, but Stephen, maybe you can ask that question over lunch. What do you think? Okay? Because I'm sure you're getting hungry. Thank you all. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful discussion. I'm pretty sure you're going to get more questions.